All right. So good morning. My name is Maddie and I am with Chiasma Chat. Welcome to our web series. This morning we have the privilege of talking with Dr. Anna Campbell from AbacusBio. Anna, thank you so much for making time this morning to talk with us.
Thanks, Maddie. Hi, everybody.
So just to get things kicked off, Anna, if you were able to give us a little bit of a rundown about yourself, your personal career, how you got to where you are now, and what sort of your study, your undergraduate and your postgraduates were.
Okay, so I started off with a pretty general science degree where I really didn't know where I was going within that science degree. So I looked at, I think in my second year I had three majors, so zoology, botany and biochemistry. Mm-hmm. I'd never recommend that, by the way. In fact, what I will say is in my 8 years of university, I only ever did one non-science paper, and that was a maths paper. And I think that's so. I would never suggest someone do a triple major. I would suggest that they do something like politics or Māori or something like that to just break things up a bit. But anyway, I kept things pretty broad at the start and ended up really enjoying botany and the applied side of botany, which really brought in biotechnology. At the time I was doing it, and genetic engineering was just in its infancy, and I found all of that really, really fascinating, and the application of that to cropping and fruit production really interesting, which made me head in that sort of biochemistry botany path, and that's what I ended up majoring in and then doing an honours degree in botany.
Oh, wow.
And then, yeah, I guess if I now go into my postgrad, I guess at the end of my botany degree, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. And it's interesting because it was a time of quite high unemployment. Mm-hmm. So, you know, we're talking in a COVID environment right now, which is similar to what some of you are facing. It was a time of high unemployment, and there was a lot of uncertainty around science careers. And I looked at jobs, and for a sort of a basic technician job, the salary was about the same as I would get with a PhD scholarship. This is not necessarily the right reason to embark on a PhD, but I thought, well, why not? I got offered a really good PhD scholarship, so I thought, well, it's the same money, and at the end of it, I get a PhD. My PhD was based at Crop and Food, which is now Plant and Food up in Lincoln. And I did that in conjunction with Lincoln University, but also had a supervisor at Otago University. And that was a very applied PhD in wheat biotechnology, so finding ways to breed wheat more quickly. And then I went on and did a postdoc in Australia, and that was more around wheat genetics.
Wow. So here, there and everywhere. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So looking back at your undergraduate, because I think a lot of students often they're wondering, oh, I've done this degree, but there's many interests that I've got in different fields. Would you recommend for students who maybe have almost completed their undergraduate degree to consider branching out of their comfort zone then?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would really, you need a certain amount for a base science degree. And I get really frustrated when I hear this from academics, people advising students not to do, for example, a commerce paper or not to do an arts paper. And I really would encourage people to explore things, because science and economics and history, they're all quite artificial constructs, and in the real world, all of these types of disciplines really merge. And so just learning about what else is out there other than a quite narrow domain, I think is really, really useful. And during your postgrad years, it's harder to do that. During your undergrad years, it's actually easier to get that base science degree, but explore, use some of those other papers to explore more widely.
Okay. Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome to hear. Well, that actually leads perfectly into the next question that I had, which was what skills and qualifications have you found to be really useful in your line of work? And also, what would you sort of suggest developing as a student? What sort of skill sets can you give yourself to really, pull yourself forward?
Yeah, so a base science degree gives you a really good analytical base. And I think whatever you end up doing, and a lot of people who do base science degrees do not end up in science, but whatever you end up doing, that base analytical learning that you've developed is is a really, really useful tool. And it just means things like, even in your personal life, you know, you can read nutritional information, or you can differentiate fake news because you've just got that analytical eye. You know, you can differentiate a bit more the wheat from the chaff, and you're trained to think in an evidence-based manner. And I think a science degree is really, really good for that. So whatever you end up doing, and it may be nothing to do with science, don't ever feel that your degree was a waste, because it has actually set you up with some really good skills that are not necessarily domain specific, if that makes sense. So they're not like, so I had a degree in botany and biochemistry, so I knew about plants and the biochemistry of plants, but actually my degree was more important, and it taught me about assessing evidence, it taught me about interpretation, it taught me about research, and it taught me that I can find information. So those are the kind of skills that are really, really important to recognise that you have out of that base degree. If I was going back again and trying to really find a good complementary skill, I personally, given the career path, I've ended up taking would have done some financial management courses. You know, we're in a world where money matters, and if you want to do amazing things in terms of developing country work, for example, or you know, you want to develop a new bioplastic, no matter what you have to do, you're going to have to find money and manage money. And it's just a reality of life. And if you don't have those skills, then often you end up in a position of inferiority to people who do have those skills, who, quite frankly, you will look at and go, why are they my boss? So, you know, just, you can self-teach yourself these things. It's not rocket science, but it is a lot of terminology. And so I think if I just done a few papers at university, I would have been more comfortable with some of that terminology. And I had to self-teach a lot of that later on.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, you know what they say about money makes the world go round, unfortunately.
Yeah. But it also helps you realise your dreams, and that's that's unfortunately is reality.
Yeah. And what you're saying as well about being able to look at information and think about it critically, I think, especially in these day and ages, it's so important to be able to do that.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah, and you really can tell when someone doesn't have a base science training. They just don't have that ability to really understand how to interpret evidence.
Yeah. So I guess on the flip side then is, have you had any particular experiences or skills that you think maybe retrospectively aren't as critical, or maybe moving into the future they have actually become more redundant?
Yeah, it's a really, I often have, I guess, an internal debate as to the education system and people, you know, going down PhD pathways, because PhD pathways tend to take you in a very narrow direction, and unless you stay in academia, your working life will not be narrow. So it's not so much that I regret doing that, because I think it was a ticket and it taught me some amazing research skills. But I do think that once you're out of your PhD, you never stop learning, and you'll realise that life is a lot more broad. So you have to understand a bit about economics, and you have to understand a little bit about history and all those things I talked about earlier. And not many people actually get the luxury, if it is a luxury, have the luxury of staying narrow for the rest of their career. Probably a few in academia do, but I think I'd love to see the stats on the number of people with PhDs who actually end up in academia. It's probably not very many. So I think you have to prepare yourself for a life outside of academia for the majority of people. And that means, I think, recognising that what you're doing is quite narrow, but making sure that you are open to learning outside of that narrow field.
Yeah, and I think that's really true, and being able to diversify yourself and not just stay in that one lane, especially if you have to move to a different field. Oh, awesome.
And I just want to interrupt, because the flip side of that is people with specialist skills and in areas that are hot, they're gold. You know, if we had someone with specialist skills in something like climate change right now, you don't want them diversifying. So it is a real, you know, it's not as simple as saying just diversify or just stay narrow. I think, and maybe that'll come down a little bit to people's personality. So some people prefer to be narrow and some people prefer to be more diverse, but also the opportunities that you take outside of your degree.
Yeah. One thing that I've told a couple of the students that I tutor and my little sister, my 18-year-old sister, is it's an overlap of three things, the way that I perceive it, which is what are you good at, what do you enjoy, and what is actually a practical thing to be doing at the moment. If it's something that's just either too far ahead in its time or too far behind, and there's just no opportunities in it, it's also not ideal.
Yeah, no, that's really good advice, and I put it down to a couple of P's really. So what's your passion, but what's practical? And so, how can you find that combination of both?
Yeah, no, that's very true. Well, that actually leads into also my next question, which was given the current COVID-19 pandemic, for the students that are really just worried about future employment and opportunities, are there any suggestions that you can make here? And do you see any particular silver linings coming out of all this?
Yeah, look, I'm quite worried for your generation, particularly coming out. I think it's probably the hardest time to come out of a degree that we've seen for a very long time. So I think around that is you've got to maintain your optimism. So and by maintaining your optimism, one thing that we all, and you know, this is in business as well. So for example, a message that I gave my team last week was, look, it is tough out there. So we have to do things that keep those connections going. So if you're a student that's, 6 months off graduating, then ask yourself or set yourself a challenge of once a month reaching out to someone in the workforce and asking them out for a coffee, or going to see one of the lecturers and having a career talk, or doing a webinar on something slightly outside your field, so that when things are challenging in terms of that environment, outside environment, control those things you can. And one of those things you can control is how proactive you are. And interestingly, I think when people like myself are in positions where we're reasonably secure, when we get asked for help, we are often really willing to give it. So we remember, I mean, I look really old to you guys, right? But we do remember being your age. And I've also got children that are at the same age, so, or just finishing school. So, we do understand what you're going through, and we want to be able to help you. So reach out widely and set yourself a goal, and flicking someone an email or knocking on someone's door and saying, look, I'd love to have a coffee or something with you, and throw some ideas around, because there's people out there with some great ideas, and there are areas in the science field that are taking off outside of COVID. So food safety is really interesting. I'm obviously in food, so I'm going to be a bit biased, but the whole food supply area, even things like, things like, if I look at farming, there's things like water management, climate change. So there are really, really hot areas. So just explore. And just because you have a PhD in XYZ doesn't mean you can't move laterally as well. So explore widely.
Mm-hmm. So I guess the question also would be that many students are wondering is, given that you've got experience in this field, AbacusBio has had summer students and what opportunities beforehand. Do you think that will have been affected across New Zealand after this pandemic?
Look, Callaghan Innovation actually helps support our internship program, and I haven't heard directly about whether they're going to support the internship program to the extent that they have. I can't imagine that they are not going to. They've just been given a nice wad of funding from the government, a new wad of funding. So I'm hoping that they will retain the level of funding that they have, in which case there still will be some good internships out there. And again, if you're interested in reaching out to a company, then reach early, because you may be able to help them go through that internship application process, because you have to the company has to apply to Callaghan Innovation for the internship. So start having those coffee conversations. It is going to be harder to get your foot in the door somewhere, but just take that as a personal challenge.
Okay, well, hopefully that's the encouragement that many of our students need, because the end of the year is not that far away anymore. I think many of them are looking at, what opportunities to go for next.
Yeah.
So with regards to, this is my last question actually, with regards to yourself, and also when it comes to sort of making a suggestion to our students, what element of personal or professional development would you personally really recommend and encourage all students to pursue?
So when you're doing a postgrad, I remember this quite strongly. When you're doing a postgrad degree, you feel like you have to work 24/7. What I learned right back when I was a student, but I've tried to carry through right through my career, is that you're actually less efficient if you work crazy hours. You don't necessarily make good decisions. You wallow on things you shouldn't wallow on, and you're just not as sparky. So I would say one of the most important skills you can learn is to know when to stop working and know when to stop feeling guilty. So say I'm going to work these hours, and then after those hours I'm not going to feel guilty about the fact that I'm going to go and play a hockey game, or I'm going to go to meditation, or I'm going to have a coffee with a friend. So it's really, really important, I think, to just learn how to manage your work-life balance, for one of a, to use a cliche, but also manage the guilt that comes with generally, if you're a postgrad student, you're generally a striving and high achiever. So part of that, you usually carry a lot of residual guilt when you're not working. So try and knock that on the head as early as you can.
Yeah. Be a complete person.
Yeah. All the cliches that you can pull out, but they're so true. And remember, you'll actually be a better scientist for it, because you will be clearer when you get up in the morning. I know when I have to, and look, there's times in your life where you have to do, you have to pull out the 24-hour shift, or you have to work all weekend. But I guarantee if I've worked all weekend, that by Wednesday the next week I'm fading and I'm not as efficient. So just learn to forgive yourself.
And I think it's also really important for people to realize that you're a perfect example. You have a family, you are a scientist, you're doing all these incredible things, but it's not just one component of who you are. And I think often we all fall into that, especially when we're in our postgrads or undergrads, that we think that it's only this one track. There's no extracurriculars, no personal life.
And I think we're also very good at portraying the things that go well, but there are always things that don't go well, and so but we don't tend to share them. So just recognize that you're your own harshest critic. Other people will see the great things you do; they won't necessarily see the negatives, but you tend to. Well, not you, but we tend to see the negatives in ourselves at a higher proportion than we do in other people. So just kind of remind yourself of that.
Yeah, wise words. Well, Anna, thank you so much for taking time today to talk to us. And I think many of our students will find that really, really fascinating and reassuring to hear. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Maddie. And good luck for all of you who are graduating. I hope you find your path. There'll be one out there for you.
Yeah.